Recorded live. Welcome to the Virtualization Security Podcast, episode number 104. Our panelist today is Eben Rodriguez, who's an IT industry veteran, now serving as a cloud solution advisor for CA Technologies.
Hello,
Michael Berman, who is working at TitleScale, a stealth mode startup. Hopefully will be joining us later. And Mike Foley, who is the VMware technical marketing team with his focus on security of the vSphere platform. I hope he will be joining us as well, but I think he's a little busy today. Myself, Edward Halecki, a.k.a. TechSiWill, in the VMware Communities Forum, Twitter, Skype, IM, you name it, and author of the book VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security, as well as VMware ESX and ESXi in the Enterprise, the second edition. And also joining us is Tim Pearson, a contributing author to the security book. He is currently out of the country, so if we lose him, that may happen. And our special guest panelist today is Mrs. Y, who is a recovering Unix engineer, most recently assigned to the network security team of a financial services provider. She also hosts a podcast called Healthy Paranoia, and which is a security feed of Packet Pushers, another podcast. And I'd like to welcome Mrs. Y, who would like to remain anonymous for our podcast. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I admire the work that you guys do.
Can we ask why you're called Mrs. Y?
No, not to maintain your anonymity. Anonymity.
Yeah. It's just, well, it's not so much the anonymity as much as now that's how everybody knows me. And it was sort of an inside joke because I'm friends with the Aircrack NG author, who his IRC handle is Mr. X. And I was asking a bunch of guys, I need a cool IRC handle. I need a cool IRC handle. And they said, well, Thomas is Mr. X. You should be Mrs. Y. And it just sort of stuck.
Oh, I thought it was Y, like WHY. I was going to say, why?
Well, and then it sort of grew into it sort of grew into that as well, I guess, because I do ask a lot. I ask that question a lot.
And your Twitter handle, if you want to follow Mrs. Y, it's Mrs. Y is Y, WHY at the end. And you constantly bombard us with like rapid posting of various security issues. And so this podcast is going to be a little bit different. Normally we talk ad nauseum about cloud and virtualization security from the realm and view of cloud and virtualization security administrators, or architects. All of us have been in that realm since almost the beginning. In fact, I started my security roles when virtualization came to me from our customers when I was with Digital. So now we're talking about it from a different perspective entirely. Now, Mike Foley and I have who actually is trying to join the podcast right now. Mike Foley and I have been going back and forth about the fact that virtualization and cloud security people, as well as virtualization cloud administrators, need to get on the same page with the security teams and compliance teams that are out there. And for a while, and this is why I were talking about this at RSA conference when we finally met for the first time, which was rather intriguing. We both know the same people, apparently. We just didn't know it.
True. That was an interesting conversation because from my perspective, I feel like, I don't directly administer virtualization. I am a customer of virtual environments, but I see the possibilities for what can happen. As far as I'm concerned, I say this a lot, bare metal is dead. I don't want to know the color of a server. I don't want to know, I'm a firm believer in the cloud virtualization, and I think it's a smart way for organizations to go in creating private clouds, self-provisioning, orchestration. But what really galls me is when I see the security people come in on their short bus and say, no, you must pull your traffic out to a hardware ASA. You must, have segmentation this way. It's like we're not, I mean, I still see this to a lesser degree from network engineers as well. They're just not really understanding what's going on in that cloud, in that virtual environment. It's very frustrating.
We put the no in innovation.
Okay, so you're saying...
Yeah, I feel like we're behind, like we're 10 years behind in certain ways.
Well, the bad guys are 10 years ahead.
Why?
right.
And there's a 20-year gap.
But when you talk to the security guys, they're the ones that think they're 10 years ahead of the virtualization and cloud guys. So you have
but they're not.
Weird dichotomy.
Yeah, well, for example, a conversation came up on a security list I'm on, and they were asking about what were the vulnerabilities in cloud environments and in virtualization environments. And the last one that came up was something that was very quickly patched by VMware. And it wasn't, it wasn't a terrible vulnerability in that there was mitigation through patching.
So what was that?
I forget the CVE, but
are you talking about direct transversal?
Yeah, but you actually had to be on the cluster, on the hypervisor itself. I mean, it wasn't like you could break out from guests.
It's one of those things that reminds me of Steve Martin's old "How to Be a Millionaire" joke, where he says, "So you want to be a millionaire? Well, first you get $1 million, and then."
Yeah, it was like that. It was like that. And then I said, and I think I responded back to the list. I sent a bunch of links. Somebody brought that up, and I said, yeah, but here's the actual exploit. And I said, one of the problems is I think security researchers and engineers don't get. I mean, it's not like somebody's going to build us a lab to play in. I mean, usually when you have a virtualization lab, it's for the systems guys and the guys who actually do the work on that. And then, they're certainly not going to let us mess around in production. So it's almost like we need our own playground to sort of test this stuff. It's the same problem that came up with SAP ERP, right? We weren't figuring out a lot of the issues because, frankly, that licensing is really expensive. You don't get that playground.
And if you think about what you're talking about, and the we here are the security people, but when you start talking about a playground, it actually has to be one-to-one. The only way to do a true measurement is 12 inches to the foot. And when you start talking about licensing a big vSphere environment, it is truly expensive. If you're talking about an equivalent Hyper-V environment, it gets about 2/3 of the way there of a similar size vSphere environment. And then if you're talking about Citrix or KVM, it's almost as expensive. So, for, let's say, a big Fortune 500 could have $1 million unit, millions, $2 million, $3 million systems there, plus all the licensing. They're not going to duplicate that for security. They're not going to duplicate that for anybody. So you start doing other things, other ways of doing research, like Workstation and Fusion, which is basically, to me, people say, "Oh, I found out to break Workstation." It's like, great, and with that, I can give you 15 cents. You can get a donut with your coffee. This is normal stuff. People can break Workstation like they're crazy.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because if they really want, if organizations and vendors really want to have a dialogue in the form of that kind of process, then something else has to be done. Either they're going to have to provide special licensing for research scenarios. I don't know, but it's, and we're not really exploring the storage hook to that whole thing. People are going out talking about, I know VMware and other companies are going out and talking about hybrid PCI, non-PCI clusters. And the problem is, no matter how much you talk about that and say, yes, we can demonstrate it, some of these old guard researchers, security engineers, are going to say, that come from a straight security realm or network security, they're going to say, I don't care, I can't hit that checkbox, I don't believe you because I can't recreate it, So no, you're not going to be able to do it. So we get
that's actually for PCI, that would be the compliance folks. And I was talking to a compliance guy.
We have a new compliance for virtualization now for PCI.
No, you actually
but a lot
don't. The document hasn't changed. Direction has.
But then the security team, which is usually a separate group, will then put the brakes on it and say no.
Yeah.
So even if you may convince the compliance guys, you may convince the systems team or the virtualization team, but then the security team, because they don't have access and maybe they're behind in their knowledge, there hasn't been this sort of like collaborative environment. So they will say no, and you're not going to go anywhere then, and it just becomes this standoff. And that's really unfortunate because virtualization doesn't align with the traditional organizational silos, and it just makes people's brains bleed out of their ears in a typical enterprise.
Well, true, and I think what is it, Mike? Fully about 30% of all workloads are virtualized right now. Is that correct?
I mean, if you talk about industry average, yeah, but
I've heard a number of numbers.
Some companies are 100% virtualized.
Yeah, I
know mine is.
It's average, isn't it?
Yeah, but the greater market.
The average is 30%, but they're not tier 1 apps generally. At the lower end.
The question to really ask yourself is how many companies processing credit card data are using virtualization technology? That's sort of the tip of the iceberg that we need to be looking at as far as this issue goes.
Well, but then it's not just the processors. It's also those providing sort of the middleware service where maybe they're providing SSL VPN gateways in transit to the processors. And since they're transit, they have to comply with PCI DSS as well.
Okay.
Only if they're considered in scope.
Right.
Right, and a lot of them are.
Only some QSAs are now starting to get it. I know of one large firm that does that sort of stuff, and they seem to be getting it and recognizing that they need to look at this not through the lens of how they did security yesterday, but the lens of how they're going to do security tomorrow.
And you know what? That QSA is going to be in demand and going to be able to charge a much higher bill rate than the QSAs who sit back and say, oh, no, it's virtualized, forget it.
Yeah, so if you're a QSA listening to this podcast and you're saying no, you're
find a way to say yes.
Find a way to say yes, because that's
you're
where the money
is. You're going to be out of a job.
Well, what I think is that, and I felt this way in one environment where I was, that the network team and the security team were putting themselves on the endangered species list by not, they should have been trying to, they should have been in the virtualization guys, like the systems guys' faces. I was there going, okay, let me touch this. Can I have access to this? Talk to me about this. Educate me, bring me up to speed. And the other guys were still asking questions. I mean, they were asking questions like, well, what about the latency? What about this? And I'm going, dude, 2006 called. That argument was over. It's over. It's done. You lost. Okay? Give it up. Give it up.
To be clear that I understand what you're talking about, were they saying that virtualization was too slow or had performance benefits? Detrimental?
We had a situation where our network, where people were still asking that old question, where there was concern about, well, wouldn't it be better to do the networking the old way, with hardware? Why do we want to do it there? Why do we want to look at possibly virtualizing security measures inside the cloud? I mean,
gotcha.
It was really.
I
already paid for this. Why do I need to buy something new?
Yeah,
I got one even better. Where's the air gap? I actually had a guy come to me and say, security guy came down, sat down with me, and says, "Explain to me where the air gap is."
Oh no,
there isn't one. And he said, "Well, then we can't approve this." I said,
"Well,
that's
tell
fine.
us
it's going to happen."
Where the air gap is when it's a network.
I'm going to tell. I told him.
Where is the air gap inside of the Cisco switch that is running an operating system, moving bits?
Right. Well, there's still people that question VLANs, okay? There's still people out there who question VLANs. I mean, now, granted, that's not the norm, but I think we're having sort of the same conversation, that happened around VLANs, and it's really unfortunate because, as a result, by not having that conversation, we're missing.
This is why you mentioned VLANs. VLANs are not a security construct. Has no mention of the word security. It's a layer 2 logical separation. That is it.
Right, but it's
a
guys
separation.
are still saying
Therefore,
it's not secure.
It's. I didn't say it wasn't secure, but if you break layer 2, VLANs are useless.
Well, fair enough. But you see where I'm going here.
Hold on. Can we not agree that VLANs can be used to limit scope?
Sure.
No.
Oh, I disagree.
All right, let's
absolutely not.
Basic. We need to do this. We've skirted this issue at every podcast. Can I not?
And we cannot.
Limit the scope.
You think you can, and I think you can't. We agree to disagree on that. And the reason why I say you cannot, because inside the virtual environment, there are at least 2 or 3 major ways to break every VLAN out there, including VXLANs, OTVs, and the new Nicira open and everything else. And
well,
all
I'm not
it means is somebody to configure something wrong, and that's it. It's that simple.
I can't really speak to the virtual switching VLAN construct there, but I can say from out on the physical hardware, that's certainly that's been established. Yeah, that's been established as you don't need to have this physical separation anymore. If you use if you configure according to best practices, if you don't restrict it. If you set up a trunk port,
hardware. If you use cheap hardware, you still have cheap solutions.
Yeah, and if you set up a trunk port and you don't restrict the VLANs on the trunk port, you get what you deserve, buddy.
Or if you use inexpensive hardware that does not have all the big enough caches and so forth to prevent all the layer 2 attacks, then you deserve what you get.
And if you protect your Cisco switches with the same password on every single switch,
there you go.
Root password or whatever, admin password or whatever
Enable.
You want to call it.
Enable.
All bets are off.
You're not using it.
And by the way, none of these are done today, right? No one does these out there in the wild?
Everybody. I mean, we have a very established way of hardening, physical switches and routers now. I mean, I think, and the problem is that we're not all. Instead, the networking guys are like, no, that is an ESX cluster. That's just a big server. I don't care. It's not my problem. I don't want to help. I don't want to get in there. Security guys are like, that's my demarc point. That's my organizational demarc point. And so they apply old models.
Yeah. So to expound on that point just a little bit, and I'm seeing this day in and day out working at VMware. And I saw it when I was at RSA as well. People are still considering the ESX servers Linux servers.
Yeah.
Good Lord,
or
never.
Unix servers. And they are treating them as such. And they're not seeing them as a consolidated network storage, etc. type of environment. So they don't look at them the same way they look at security devices, the same way they look at switches and storage arrays and so on and so forth. To them, that's just, it looks like Linux, therefore it is Linux.
So, Mike, hold on a second, guys. We're all talking over each other. I want to get one comment in first, and then we'll go to Mrs. Y.
Mike, I think it has to do...
Tim, hold on a second. I'm going in order here. Mike? Okay. They don't look at it. I mean, to be honest, virtualization is the first converged infrastructure. It's a software converged infrastructure.
Yeah.
It has everything in it. And if you don't look at it that way, you're going to be missing the boat. Mrs. Y, you had a comment.
I think I said that.
I think that it's, I heard Ivan Pepelnyk say this before with regards to software-defined networking, and I think it's appropriate here. it's a struggle for people to separate the logical from the physical. They for the longest time, I mean, it was the same thing, and now it's completely different. And it literally frightens people. It creates cognitive dissonance that they're just not prepared to deal with as an organization or as human beings. And I think it's going to take a lot of education, a lot of outreach, and also in terms of creating the lab environments for people to use. And I don't know if that means vendors start providing special licenses for research and lab that will make it less onerous for organizations to do that.
Can I put in a plug?
Hold on, Tim, you have a comment?
My comment was actually to Mike Foley's comment where people are still considering it a Linux server. And where that comes from is the Red Hat Service Console that was used to be used. But think about it this way. A Cisco router running an iOS, that's really a modified version of Linux that they're running there as the operating system. This is what VMware is. We're just not a particular
the management console. You are correct. The underlying actual hypervisor, not even close.
I agree, but that's where it came from.
Oh, absolutely. So, Mike, you wanted to put a plug in?
Yeah. So for full disclosure, I work for VMware. Blah blah blah.
No.
If you are someone who wants to become more familiar with this stuff, go to VMware.com, search for the hands-on labs, and there are a whole bunch of hands-on labs, just like at a VMworld, that you can sign up and take and learn for free. There's the excuses of, well, I don't have the infrastructure, I don't have this, I don't have that. I'm sorry, I can't buy that anymore. There's plenty of opportunity there. If you have a Mac or a Windows box, you can get a copy of Workstation or Fusion or, some other vendor's virtualization solution and play around with virtualization. You can get, if you want to play with ESX and vCenter and everything on your Mac, you get a copy of Fusion and you download a copy of AutoLab and get the free copy, the free 60-day trial versions of all of the software, and go off and go build it. So the excuse of, well, I don't have that, so therefore no, I don't buy that anymore.
Well,
not anymore, not with AutoLab and things like that.
Right, but in fairness, you're not. That doesn't really replicate the environment. If I want to do a vulnerability assessment or even a pen test that replicates the environment that I actually have, I mean, that's not necessarily going to meet my needs completely. I mean, in fairness,
No, I get that, but if it's, well, I don't understand that stuff, therefore no.
Okay, that's fair.
Then there is no excuse.
And if you wanted to pen test ESX or vCenter or whatever, it's extremely easy to do virtual these days, so that you can just pen test those components. Granted, you're not duplicating all your Nexus and all the other hardware components, but hey, there's even virtualized versions of those.
And if you're going to take one thing away from this podcast, make sure that your vCenter and ESX management interfaces are on a separate secured management LAN, not a VLAN,
please.
Separate secured management LAN.
Please.
Then your issue of pen tests become less of an issue.
And not only that, you want them to have you need to have them on a separate network segment, but they should also be firewalled so that vCenter and the management consoles and any tools that directly touch either vCenter or those management consoles are actually behind that firewall. The only thing you want going through that firewall is RDP or VNC. That's it. Nothing else. Don't put holes in it.
Okay. Well, that gets to a whole other discussion about data classification and network segmentation that's appropriately based on data classification. But that also means people understanding that it's that whole idea of logical constructs that just makes people lose it. They if we actually had that, if we had service catalogs, if we had business catalogs of, what we offer, and then we had data classification and application flows, then we'd have better security. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's value in obviously there's value in firewalls, IDS, IPS, introspective policy types of VM virtualization tools like Catbird and High Trust and everything. But you're going to gain a lot more value out of architecting it right in the first place. If you build your network segmentation right in the first place, then you're not poking holes in it for everything.
Well, I think that all boils down to architecting this and architecting it with security in mind, and not telling the security guy after you've built everything, oh, yeah, by the way, go secure it. Because the only thing he's going to be able to do is say, okay, wrap it all in a firewall.
Right.
And
also understanding some of the better options out there for layer 2 security in virtual environments. Just, Altor, which is now VGW, Catbird, et cetera, as I mentioned before, it's just they are not on anyone's radar in security teams. I bring up these products, and they just, and your standard security team, you don't have any specialists who understand virtualization, and they just go, oh, what's that?
Well, then you add in things that you need the virtualized versions of what they do now, and that they do exist. We've mentioned those quite a few times.
And it comes with VMware on every version except for standard. vShield, or what's it called now, VCNS, is now comes with the product on every version except for standard, to my knowledge.
No, that's only EPSec. If you're talking about vCloud Suite, then yes, vSphere itself, EPSec comes with it.
It's called something else now.
Okay, forget about the details. The point is that there's some equivalent things that you do for securing a physical or virtual network environment. You can do the same thing for a server environment. And
not only that,
translating that.
And you don't even need to translate it. They actually have, if you're dealing with Juniper, Cisco, Fortinet, or any of those, they actually have virtualized versions, or even Palo Alto. They have virtualized versions of their own.
The one thing that bothers me is that some of those virtualized devices are not really the most efficient, or they seem to have no understanding of the virtualized environment. What I'm impressed about is some of the stuff out there that actually hooks into either a physical security management environment, or hooks into the hypervisor to understand at a better layer what's actually going on. Yeah, exactly, and that's that I have a problem with vendors who their virtualization strategy is just to virtualize their hardware. I'm like, no, that's not good enough.
For a virtual firewall appliance, I would be concerned about the performance. Now, have you found anything along those lines?
I got to tell you, I don't know a lot of people using virtual firewalls. I talk to people a lot in the industry, in the networking side, and I see host-based, the implementation of host-based firewalls, and I hear a lot of people. We had just started using Catbird in the UK, and for policy restrictions and separation. And apparently, the feedback was that the admin really, really liked it. And but I don't see a real
explain what you mean by host-based. Explain what you mean by host-based. In our community, host means something very specific.
Well, yeah, I think what needs to happen is there are three places that need to happen in terms of hardening. I think there needs to be some host-based hardening, maybe the installation of a guest firewall on the guest operating system, and then I like the introspection firewalls that do it. At I guess the hook is at the virtual NIC level. And then I'd like to see the edge firewall at the routing side. But, I'd like to see all three, but a lot of security guys, they don't understand that middle part, that introspection firewall that can happen with the policy management.
So you're talking about the ability to actually... Hold on.
Too many people talking at once again. Tim, you start saying something.
I was going to ask
I said all three of those are available today.
Oh, Eben, Tim first.
All three of those are available today.
Yes, they are.
From one vendor and only one vendor, but you've got to understand that we're in a multi-hypervisor world, so we're looking at Hyper-V doesn't necessarily have introspective. Zen and KVM do not necessarily have introspective.
Okay.
So you got to think about all of those in your cloud, in your environment. Yeah. So, Eben, you were saying?
Yeah, the feature is called the VM. It's like a filter driver that gets installed on the ESX host. Isn't that part of VM Safe? And the firewalls have the ability to actually detect and act on traffic in between VMs running on the same host. If the traditional model, like you were saying, if you take a virtual appliance firewall and route the traffic through it, only traffic that gets routed through that firewall can act on. Since it doesn't have the intelligence to inspect the traffic going through the virtual switch of the ESX host, it can't act on packets between virtual machines on the same VLAN. So that's where we're trying to say is that intelligent firewall. That's what we're looking for, is that capability. As far as I know, only VMware offers that, and only
actually not anymore.
Firewall vendors.
Not anymore. Hyper-V has it now. There is a company out there I just found out about today, actually, called Five9. And I'm trying to get a briefing on them and find out what they really do, but they claim to have an introspective firewall for Hyper-V.
Awesome.
But you got to remember what an introspective firewall really is, and this is really what the security guys need to grab onto, is that it is a inline packet filtering firewall, maybe protocol level firewall, depending on whose you get. But it can only say yay or nay to a packet. It cannot do edge type of functionality like NATs and address relocations and things like that.
Yeah,
It cannot do any of those types of translations. Very packet filtering only.
Yeah, exactly.
But
that's still value. There's value in that.
Absolutely. And that's where you can also put an IDS. Right in that layer.
And I want to see, that's the other thing. I don't want to see IDS traffic. I don't want to see the traffic having to go out to a physical IDS unless it's something like Tipping Point, where they have the tunnel that goes out. But there are other options. There's the Phantom Tap from NetOptics. I think from the network side and from the standard security side, they need to get smarter. Vendors need to get much more on the ball in terms of, this isn't going away. We need to meet a greater need, because I see some companies doing it, and it's the information then doesn't get out in the right ways to, engineers working in the space that I normally inhabit.
So right now you're saying that most engineers most security people are saying, hey, just hairpin it out to the firewall.
Oh, yeah, that's easy.
And if you do, that's easy. It's easy to do. Yeah, absolutely. And I have 1 billion requests per second. I'm going to hairpin it out and now have 2 billion traveling through my virtual network. Exactly. You've got to be kidding me. Never going to happen.
Goes to the roof.
They don't understand. When you start talking low volume, not a problem. You start talking cloud quantities and volume, that's a huge issue.
Sure, and that's why Amazon and Google have, and the huge cloud companies have their own custom solutions. They're not playing in this space. They're not having these arguments anymore. They're like, well, we have to have this, so we're going to reshape the whole way it works. And I just don't understand. It's very frustrating for me because, I'm trying to have these conversations. I go out and I want to support. I'm here to support the cloud in the best way I can and ensure that it's secure. And that doesn't mean becoming a one-person culture of no and saying just because I don't understand it or because I don't, know how it works, I'm going to just say no.
And it's
almost like you're going to a gunfight with a knife.
Depends on how far you can throw and fast, but you only get one shot.
I guess so.
And this is the interesting thing. This is the uphill battle that we've been trying to fight for 5 years now, and that even longer is that the security teams need to be part of the solution. Because what happened was, early on, virtualization came in through the application teams. Security wasn't involved because it was under the covers. It was just security just wasn't involved. It was a way to get more servers. Then security found out about it and said, hey, we can't do that. The application team just kept on doing it. CFO found out it was saving them money, so the CFO backed it. The CIO is now usually sometimes working for the CFO. The CISO is definitely not on top of things. He's usually working for somebody else, and dollars are calling. Dollars are actually making things work. So when it comes down to cost and you're saving the company money, keep going. Security.
Their feet.
So what I would like to see, and if anybody's doing a greenfield install of virtualization today, which I'm sure there's still a bunch of them out there, get your security teams involved from the beginning.
And the networking team, too, because sometimes operational networking security, like firewalls, for example, lives in the networking group.
And also your storage team, because there's some security measures that have to be taken in the storage layers. And as we move to virtualized storage, which is a totally different conversation, and storage hypervisors, storage security is going to become much, much more of an issue, I think.
Well, I think it's actually an issue now, but nobody's really, again, I think security researchers don't have a lot of access to EMC SANs, so they're not breaking it as much as they would be able to normally, but it'll happen. So yeah.
Well taken, because in Oracle, when they opened up Oracle with the free versions, boy, they found all kinds of bugs then, didn't they?
Yep.
When it was a closed, when Ellison kept it closed and really high priced, there wasn't that many people that found stuff. So your point's well taken.
I mean, it doesn't mean it's not there. If it's security via obscurity, I'm not a big fan of that. So, because I think, when you talk to the Govy guys, the people are doing it. It's just not as known. It's not well publicized, but that doesn't mean it's not vulnerable or that it's not being taken advantage of.
And if they even know it's even happening when it is.
That's the other problem.
That's the biggest problem. They're oblivious to the fact. I had 2 guys this week that had a data center in Kosovo, and they had to go out of the room and say, we got to fix this now. Because, Ed, you already know what happened. Same thing everybody does. They have their vSphere client on their local workstation, and just by a little demonstration that I always do, poison between their local workstation and the default gateway, and even if you're on a managed network, doesn't matter. I'll still grab your credentials, and if you're your domain admin, I'll grab that too.
And by the way, that attack works for all the hypervisors. It's not just vSphere.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that is the simplest attack out there. People are going, I'll just go ahead and, they're always worried about escape to VM, and it's not a major concern when you're talking about risk.
But there's no problem with the self-signed certificate as long as you know that's your certificate. You should be installing that certificate after you have verified that certificate.
Well, there's like 5 ways to break SSL. Let's not get into that. That's regardless of whose product you're using. So this is why. Are they concerned about the management layers at all? Are they even looking at it? Or are they still concentrating on escape the VM and the hypervisor itself?
I think that I get the impression that they're looking at management, but only in terms of segmentation. And, if it's a web interface, it'll be the standard, okay, is there a cross-site scripting vulnerability, any injection, things like that. They're not, I don't know how, I don't get the impression, when I'm on a mailing list and people are asking about virtualization stuff, I go to security conferences, I don't see a lot of discussion about various vulnerabilities. It's mostly a lot of what they talk about is breaking it out of a guest into the hypervisor, or breaking out from one guest to another guest so you can look at process space or memory space in another guest. I mean, that's a lot of what I hear about.
Which is really interesting. You and I go to some of the same conferences, and when I'm talking to them, we're always talking about the management layers, because escape the VM, the only thing you can do to protect yourself is to have proper anti-affinity rules for various high-value virtual workloads. And the only way you can set those anti-affinity rules is to actually have good management. So, for example, you may have a network that, for example, you may have a security product in there that requires you to have a promiscuous mode Ethernet adapter, which is pretty common these days.
Yes, it is.
That's even in the physical world. That's extremely common. Well, what you want to do is set up some anti-affinity rules so only that object fits into that one location where that can be. If you have another workload showing up on that particular part of the network, that is a really bad thing, and it should never happen. Right?
I think, maybe, checking, validating that kind of, those kinds of limits and policies. It's like auditing firewall rules. Security groups don't typically like to do that work, right? They don't doing the audit work or the log correlation work because it just ain't sexy. So, and I usually yell at my colleagues about that, where they'll want to go reverse engineer malware. And I'm like, there's no return on that. I don't really care how the house burned down. I don't care. Fix it, move on, try to, set up a good infrastructure in the first place, try to prevent it. Okay, that's how much you need to know about it. But, you still have to go in and look for the problems in your mitigation tools in the first place. You got to audit your firewall rules at least on a quarterly basis. And you should be checking.
Goodness, you look at them.
Go on.
My feed is logs aren't any good unless you look at them.
Go on, Mrs. Fly.
I'm so, and then the other problem is, they're not, I don't typically see a lot of organizations really, setting up documentation for this is the best practice and how we need to have our management, environment segmented, the kind of policies we need to have. I mean, it takes a level of understanding and careful architecture and documentation that, you can't really blame most organizations. They tend to be reactive, and that takes a level of proactivity that a lot of organizations don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mike, you and I have been talking about this for years, I think.
We've been talking about a lot of stuff for years.
Well, and when we start talking about that, for example, there's a bunch of recent hacks that are out there against the management layers. Knowing how they're perpetrated is one thing, and knowing what they do is a different thing. I want to know how they're perpetrated so I can close the hole. Then I need to know what they impact, so that's where I would do my analysis. But, just looking at cross-site scripting, this is why in a web interface, I can guarantee you if you find one, that's great. How do you mitigate it? Because getting it changed is going to be very, very difficult. Telling me I cannot use my management node is going to be very difficult, because then it means I can't manage the system, which means I'm going to ignore you.
Right, and that's typically what happens. I see that in a lot of situations where it's just not a collaborative approach. It's not, if you build it, if you start to work on building a good design in the first place with understanding that those risks could exist, then you can minimize some of that. But I just don't see that happening. I don't see those conversations. I don't see that level of information being transferred back and forth. And I think that's probably the first step that needs to take place.
I think a lot of people don't go into this with the thought in their head of, I will be compromised. They go in with, I'll make sure I don't get compromised.
And it's so naive, right?
It is.
I mean,
you really have to go in there with, I will get compromised. Now, how do I react to being compromised?
Exactly.
Because when I get compromised, I'm not going to have the time or resources to figure out why. I'm going to be pressured by the business to get everything back up and running.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you build it right in the first place, you understand, I need the airbag and the seat belt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I need to go in. For example, Brookings just came out with that report about how traditional risk management has not been shown to be effective in security, the traditional risk management approach. And the problem is that, that approach tends to focus on the end product, the end result, with very little consideration at the beginning to secure design, secure writing of applications, with baking it in at the very beginning. If there's more focus on that, like you said, involving the security team and the network team at the very beginning of the process, then it's not sort of anecdotal and pasted on at the end.
Yeah, I'm afraid those folks that want to ensure that they can plug every hole will be like that kid with his finger in the dike and another one pops out.
Yeah.
What you got to be able to do is have a separate, even more secure system that's logging everything so that you can at least do some level of forensics either very quickly or after the fact. And you've got to have the capability to respond to everything going to hell in a handbasket, which means really good backups, or in the case of VDI, the ability to delete all VDI sessions and create brand new ones from a clean build. I mean, all this sort of stuff isn't what security guys think through, because that's IT's job. And
to me, it is a security coming up with those rules that yes, when this happens, you need to do this. That is security's job.
Yeah, but
IT's job is implementing them. Like for example, the delete of all the workstations because this particular hack came in. But coming up with that gold master with all the security stuff in it, that's still security's job.
I have a little story to add on this one. I'll never forget when I started working at, I won't say the company, but years ago, they had a policy is for a lot of software developers. It was a software development company. And developers could install any OS they wanted, and the idea was that they would find more bugs this way. Well, of course, they would get viruses and other things breaking out left and right because the systems weren't patched or centrally managed. And the policy was if a machine gets a virus, they figured out what port it was on, and they turned it off from the network. So it was like a stick, basically. If the developer doesn't patch his system, gets a virus, he knows that he's probably going to have his machine turned off in the middle of something important. So that was one thing. And when VDI came out, it was a big deal because they could change that policy and give the developer the ability, you had a 15-minute grace period basically from when a virus was detected to where they shut you down. And if you get a notice saying you got a virus, he's like, whoops, better fix that right away. And he just built himself a new machine and it went away. So those VDI and virtualization, they have a powerful security impact, and you do have to change your policies. But a lot of it has to do with education of these.
Yeah, and I think an even bigger potential security impact is DevOps. Things like Puppet and Chef and so on and so forth. That ability to say, you know what, I can now create a server that does a particular task, and I can have a log of everything that went on that server, and then I can monitor all changes after the fact.
Well,
so
not only
that if I need to rebuild from scratch, it's just a matter of pulling out the right recipe and off I go.
And some of those
but then you have the problem that I may have purpose-built, I may be logging everything, but now I'm up to the point where I have terabytes, if not petabytes, of just log data. And going through that quickly is very, very difficult.
That's
Well,
Yeah,
as a person
you know
whose
what,
company
log
is owned by
correlation is
Again, we're going over on top of each other even first.
I was just going to say some of those systems are set up to where, say, an administrator of a system turns off the firewall because he wants this port open and it's not working because the centrally managed policy has that port closed. So he turns off IP tables, for example. The tool will come back 15 minutes later and turn it back on because he didn't go through the central process. So he gets trained, if he wants to open that port, he has to go to the central Puppet Master or Chef cookbook and fix it via policy for his one system. That's logged and tracked, but now it's enforced centrally.
Well, I understand how Puppet and Chef work, and I think that's a great idea if you can implement those recipes out there, and not a lot of people know how to do that. So
where they don't have the cycles to do it, right?
Or they don't have the cycles.
I have one
Hold
even.
Hold on a second. Mrs. Watt, you were saying something?
Yeah, I mean, like you made a point about going through log data, and that is still a struggle. I call it, usually what happens with security anymore when you try to go through all that kind of amount of data, it's more like security archaeology than actually anything close to real time. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge that, are we just being gluttons, or are we actually looking at finding ways to intelligently deal with the increasing amounts of data that we get for compliance and auditing and everything else? And I don't see that happening because, you can't just throw in a log logic appliance or Splunk and then just think it's going to magically, okay, yeah, I got to check the little box, but is it actually giving me anything? And that takes some planning and some intelligence and,
Tim, you had a comment.
Yeah, you're still going to have to search for Splunk. You can search everything at once. But the comment I wanted to make earlier is, in regards to Eben's story was closing the ports. I can go up one better than that. We did a pen test one time, and they said, this is our dev environment. It's virtualized. This is our dev environment. It's available from the Internet, but don't test that. Or do you mean the one that's attached to your corporate environment? We don't want that shut down, so don't test that. I'm still to this day trying to figure that out.
It's a dev environment. There's no sensitive data there other than the customer list.
Environment.
Other than all that fresh PII you're using to do development, I would love that.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mrs. Y, your archaeology comment is actually really interesting because recently I was patching a system because it was hacked, and the solution was basically to remove privs for everything and just let it run, so nothing could write to anything locally on the disk. But what was really interesting is your comment, because it did take hours to go through the log files to find the actual attack where the point of attack was. Once you knew the point, you can go in and say, oh, okay, it was attacking there. I know what that goes to. I can remove that chunk of the code, or I can change things how it works so it's no longer there. But you still have to go through and do it. You can't just say, here, I'm going to mitigate this attack, but if you don't know how the vector of that attack, you're only doing half the job. You've mitigated it, but just come back. You have to do it, you have to mitigate it again.
And that's fair. That's fair, but I don't think a lot of the tools, some of the traditional tools that people put in place, they're misunderstanding what the capability of the tools are. I mean, one of my favorite new products out there, and it's open source, is Bro IDS, because it doesn't operate like a traditional IDS. It also takes multiple inputs. For example, it takes NetFlow data. It takes syslog data, and then it takes packet capture data. So, and it can create sort of a JDL fusion model and then get a better sort of pattern of attack. So it's not using that traditional kind of signature. It's looking for frequencies and thresholds and at a much faster and higher level. It's really impressive in what they've done, and it's actually been rolled into Security Onion. And so it works at, apparently it works at line speed. A lot of government installations use it.
Oh, that is impressive.
Bro IDS.
Yep. I highly
BRO.
recommend checking it out. Yeah, it's
BRO.
rolled into, yeah, BRO, and it's rolled into Security Onion, which is Doug Burke's sort of live CD or rolled together distro of a lot of forensics logging and analysis tools. And it's interesting that he, included Bro in that mix. I think it's worth investigating and checking out.
Well, the question then becomes, does Security Onion actually have anything that's virtualization or cloud specific in it? Because looking through the logs of a virtual machine virtualization host, a virtual network for attack vectors is very, very different than looking through your network logs. It's a totally
well, they're
different
always
threat.
looking for developers, as I understand it.
I've talked to some of the major log analysis companies out there, and they literally don't have anything for security other than, the person logged in, the person logged out.
I think that's great, and I encourage you. Bro IDS is always looking for developers. Security Onion is. I mean, that would be great to have. For example, Security Onion. Bro IDS now can determine if there's a Lucky 13 attack on the network. They also have some new components to find out if people are responding to phishing attacks. So I'm thinking that they could probably, because of the way that they can parse multiple data sources and keep vectors for that information, I'm betting that would be a better option in probably, integrating more virtual specific kind of environments and tracking that. But I would encourage you to reach out to Liam Randall or somebody else from the Bro team.
Definitely need to get those guys get on the phone with those guys. Mike.
Yeah.
You have something that you put in alpha on the VMTN recently. Would you like to discuss that at all?
Yes. The hardening guide? Yeah, as a matter of fact, while we've been on the call, I've released the release candidate to internal use for internal review. The vSphere 5.1 hardening guide will be up on the communities and VMTN probably within a week or so.
And right now the alpha version is up on VMTN, so if you go there, you can get it and look through it, and you're still accepting comments, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Oh, cool.
And the release candidate will go up there hopefully next week, barring no major changes internally, and it'll be up there for about 2 weeks for comments, and hopefully it meets what people are looking for. If not, please comment, and then I'll make the changes, and we're shooting for a mid-April release.
Can you give us a little insight? Anything major changed from 5.0?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, I think there's one. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. There's one major change that I can see.
Would be SSO.
And that is your profiles.
The host profile stuff? Oh,
no.
The profile. Oh, profiles. Yes. So we now have what we call profiles. So profiles 1, 2, and 3. 1 would be for places like 3-letter agencies and ultra paranoid things. That is the shut everything down until it's almost unusable settings. Profile 2 would be more of an enterprise. Profile 3 would be, say, a small medium business type of customer. And so some of the settings might be just profile 1, or they might be profile 1, 2, and 3. For example, there's one called Disable Data Store Browsing. That would be a profile 1 because it has effects on other things. And then there is one that I added called Restrict Data Store Browsing, which would be probably more useful for enterprise and small, medium business type folks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the biggest problem we had with the hardening guide before. So if anybody would like to go see the hardening guide, you need to have a VMTN ID. That's communities.vmware.com.
It's also on blogs.vmware.com.
Excuse me?
And blogs.vmware.com/vSphere. It's buried in there, and also /security, I believe. And
yes.
That links to where the files are on the VMware communities.
Is there anything on there on? I'm sorry. I was saying there's any separation of duties.
Say again, Tim?
Is there anything on there on separation of duties? Because that's always been a big bug of mine. Because the same person wears the same hat and makes and connects the DMZ corporate network.
You really have to look at the hardening guide as the checklist as opposed to the prescriptive way of here's how you should run your business. Because each business is going to be run differently. Some people have security teams. Other people can't even spell security. We tried to make the profiles in the list a way that people could say, well, I'm really not, a three-letter agency. I don't need to be ultra-paranoid. I still want to get stuff done. I'm probably closer to a Profile 2 or Profile 3, so I'll just implement, what's important to me that it also meets a Profile 2 or 3 classification.
Okay.
Right? Because Profile 1 does have in some of these controls that are in the guide, Profile 1 does have connotations around, so for example, if you do the disable web browsing, you turn off all HTTP and HTTPS access to your data store browser, which then affects third-party products that might use that capability, say, around for backups and such.
So what I was going to suggest is that anybody who's interested in listening to this should go to communities.vmware.com. If you don't have an ID, go there and create one. Yep. Mrs. Y, I would love to see your comments on it, so please do. And there is a form in there called the Security and Compliance Form that this stuff is announced in.
I freely admit to being virtualization challenged. I mean, I don't have a lot of hands-on experience. I'm trying to, play catch up. So I am. So
join the conversation. It's actually the Security and Compliance Forum inside the communities.vmware.com is really, really good for airing those questions.
Is it still in a spreadsheet format?
Yeah, so for it's currently all being done with Excel spreadsheets. Not my first choice, but remember, I only started here 2 months ago.
Well, it actually helps us quite a bit. We're in the Center for Internet Security. We're going to be leveraging a lot of that guidance in the benchmark, which is
I look at the spreadsheet as the final product, and I'm trying to find a better way of generating all of the right information, doing all of the change tracking, so on and so forth, because I think at some point someone's going to want to know everything that changed, and make it easier to manage, because right now changes have to be sent to me via email because quite honestly, I don't trust Excel's merging capabilities. I would rather go through it hand by hand.
Gotcha.
So last words, since we have gone over our 1 hour time, and it's been an incredible joy to have Mrs. Y on the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for asking.
So even a last word.
Don't forget, we need more security professionals out there. Unemployment rate is currently less than 0 for us, so please join the club.
Mr. Foley?
Take what we say and walk away with it and have a really good think on what we've said. Being the guy who brings the word no to innovation is not going to make you a hero. Working with your IT guys who own this infrastructure and who are collapsing a lot of the traditional ways of doing things it's time to sit down with them and figure out how you can contribute rather than how you can say no. Because at
Amen,
some point it's going to boil up to a business guy who's just going to say, "Yeah, I don't want to hear no. I got a business to run."
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
So there's a lot of opportunity in saying yes.
And Mrs. Y, your comment, last comment.
I would encourage, anybody in virtualization, because I'm presuming that most of the listeners are in the virtualization side of the house. Go out and take your networking guys and your virtualization guys and your security guys and get them lunch or a cup of coffee and start making friends. Create affinity, and then so that you can create an opportunity for conversation. We have to start ignoring these silos, these organizational silos, and seeing each other as threats. This is the only way we're actually going to make progress in actually securing the environment.
Tell that to Congress.
Well, that's a different podcast entirely. And my last words
that'll be on the Glenn Beck show tomorrow.
If you're a security person listening to this and you want to get involved, the vSphere hardening guide is a good step in the right direction. Matter of fact, if your hypervisor of choice happens to be Hyper-V or Zen Server from Citrix, or KVM from Red Hat, they all have hardening guides. Go and visit and read them and understand them. If you have questions, bring up the questions to the virtualization team. For the virtualization folks, I'm in agreement with Mrs. Y. You need to get the security folks on your side. You need to get the networking folks on your side. It'll make your life a lot easier. Talk to them. Do your best to be a facilitator between all the teams. And I think that's the ultimate role of the senior virtualization admins, is to be that facilitator to get the architectures done right. And Mike, what did we say? We got asked, where do you start with all this? And we both came up with the same answer at once. What was it?
Autolab?
No, architecture.
Oh, architecture, right.
Right.
Yeah.
But
build it right from the start, or rebuild it later.
Most of our most successful projects are 90% planning, 10% execution.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, if you were to sit down and take the VMware install and config course, one of the first things they will say is, before anyone sits down and turns on anything and starts thinking they're going to create VMs, we're going to talk about architecting out this before the first VM is done.
Oh, God,
right.
Yes. Please do design documentation. A Visio diagram is not a design document.
Right.
Step away from Visio.
I know one company I just got a briefing from that spent 2 years architecting their secure environment, their security inside their cloud and their virtual environments. And it took them just 8 weeks to implement it.
Good for them.
Because they had good architectures and good designs. So they rocked and rolled because they did all the work, the legwork beforehand.
And
very, very important.
And I am seeing customer story after customer story where the success stories are the ones that involve the security guy up front.
Yep.
Right.
The failure stories are the ones where someone said no.
And networking guys, too. Include the networking
guys, too.
Always
with an open mind.
Well, Mrs. Y, thank you very much for joining us. It gave us a totally different perspective than we normally have on this podcast. I thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much. And
everyone,
healthy paranoia.
Healthy paranoia and packet pushers, right?
Right. Healthy paranoia, because sometimes they really are out to get you, and packet pushers because too much networking is never enough.
Okay. And
sounds like Laura.
With that, I'm going to end this podcast. I'll see everybody in 2 weeks where we have another guest coming that is actually a gentleman that implemented an actual secure cloud. So we'll have something else to talk about how he did that. Thank you for joining us.
beyhude gözleri. Balıkta değil efkarım, sancak saçlı saniyem, beyhude gözleri. Penceresi yola karşı, penceresi yola karşı, gelen geçen atar taşı, gelen geçen atar taşı. Benim yarim kalem kaşı, benim yarim kalem kaşı. Var ara eşini, eşini bay bay, saysana liraların beşini bay bay. Var ara eşini, eşini bay bay, saysana liraların beşini bay bay.
alacaklar. Şu